Welcome to A Change of the Chance. It is May 24th, 2020, and this is our 5th episode. My name is Ryan Lowe, and I am a 6th grader at the Sachem School. My goal is to educate listeners, especially young listeners, about the issues in our world by interviewing experts who can help us all. Today, we have a very special guest who is currently the Communications Director at the Global Environmental Facility. But he has also very impressively led communications at the World Bank and United Nations Environment Program. Let's give a warm welcome to Mr. Robert Bisset, or as I proudly call him, Uncle Robbie. Hello, Uncle Robbie. How are you doing in quarantine?
Hi, Ryan. Lovely to speak to you and your listeners. I'm doing very well. I'd love to get out a little bit more, but we all have to stay safe and stay inside and do our best at the moment. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us today. For today's chat, I am hoping you can shed some light on some of the Global Environmental Facility's biggest priorities for our listeners. So, can you tell us all about the Global Environmental Facility and the organization's goals and missions?
Sure. The Global Environment Facility, or we call it the GEF, GEF, it was set up in 1972, around the time of the first Rio Earth Summit, and very much with a goal to protect the global environment. So it works all over the world, mainly giving grants, that's money, not loans, to developing countries for projects around climate change, around protecting forests, protecting animals. So it does this, and it shares about, well, it's a big sum of money. It's about $1 billion each year in terms of grants for the protection of the global environment, and lots of different projects and programs. So it's an organization with a very big mandate and involved in a lot of places around the world.
I never realized how expensive that is, but it's amazing that you work through it. So, yeah. I would like to use this interview mainly to explore some of GEF's main focus points, such as climate change, the international waters, and forests. Let's talk about climate change first. What are some things that multiple countries are doing together to help reduce the amount of greenhouse gases in the air?
Yeah, no, thanks, Ryan. I think climate change is a very important issue to start with. It's probably one of the, if not the most important issue impacting us at the moment, or will impact us over the years to come. As you may, and your listeners may have heard about something called the Paris Agreement. This was where all the countries of the world came together to agree on a common target, a target to actually keep emissions of global, what we call greenhouse gas emissions, below a certain temperature level in the atmosphere. Now, this is not easy, and it takes a lot of working together, a lot of agreement, and a lot of money, to be honest. And what we do at the GEF is that we try and help countries, particularly developing countries, meet those targets. And that might be supporting projects to cut carbon emissions from, say, polluting transport, or it might be making something, investing more in renewable energy, but doing projects and programs which actually bring down the carbon pollution, which is making our Earth hotter and will eventually lead to bigger problems in the years ahead.
Wow. It's concerning that the Earth gets so hot, but it's amazing that there are so many people out there helping to make it better.
Yeah, but there's always a big need to do more, and I think we're seeing climate change is often talked about something for the future, but increasingly we're seeing the impacts now, and I think and where I know you live on the West Coast. I mean, I live on the East Coast of the U.S. in Washington D.C., but on the West Coast, the recent forest fires, and we've seen increasing storms and droughts in Africa, and there's growing evidence that climate change impacts are actually happening now. So while it's something that we need to be concerned about for the future, it's actually taking place now. So we need to act as soon as possible on this issue.
Well, I hope this fact will inspire many more to keep helping. What do you do when countries don't cooperate with your work?
Well, we try and give countries the tools, and also particularly the organization that I work for, the finance, the money to enable them to cooperate. We're not a global policeman. We're not. Our job isn't to actually force countries to cooperate, but it's very important that we enable them to be able to take actions and to do things which actually what we call mitigate, which or adapt to climate change. So we try and give them the resources and the actual tools to be able to do something about it. We think that's very important, because if you don't actually have the resources, it's very hard for countries, particularly those countries in say Africa or Southeast Asia, which don't have many resources. It's very hard for them to actually take action against climate change, and it's really important that everybody contributes to this problem. If we don't all do something about it, then we're all in this together. We'll all have problems.
So you give countries resources to help them fight against climate change, and if they don't cooperate, that's okay.
Well, no, I mean we want them to cooperate, but it's very hard because sometimes countries don't actually have the ability to always meet these targets. Like all these countries that come together in a global agreement, this thing that people talk about, the Paris Agreement. There's what these 180 odd countries have signed up to do is to actually provide reports to demonstrate that they're actually cutting their emissions, but also invest in things to adapt, to respond to climate change. So it's very hard for them to cooperate if they don't actually have the resources to enable them to do this reporting, to take these different actions. And this is where the Global Environment Facility comes in. So we help countries to meet what we call their obligations under these big treaties, like the Paris Climate Treaty.
I never knew. I never knew that. Oh,
No, it's often something which you don't really. A lot of this work you don't necessarily read about it in the newspapers or hear about it on the news. It's something that happens behind the scenes quite a lot. Doesn't get an awful lot of attention, but it's absolutely critical for the end goal of actually dealing with climate change.
well, I hope everyone keeps pushing. Another area,
Absolutely.
another area that the GEF focuses on is international waters. Can you tell us exactly what that is?
Yeah, no, thanks for asking it. And again, that's an area of our work which again you don't hear a lot about, but it's actually very important. If we're a global organization, so we deal with over 170 countries. A lot of problems to do with water, whether it's marine water or whether it's terrestrial water, goes across boundaries, goes across borders. So the ecosystems where water is a key part, they don't necessarily respect national borders. So we support projects and programs that deal with problems which go across different countries' borders, to be able to find solutions to things like water pollution, to the drought, and even problems actually of conflict. There's a lot of issues in the world where there's conflict over access to fresh water, to water resources. So we support projects to enable countries to come together and work on solutions of a more regional nature. So that's what, when we talk about international waters, that's what we're talking about in that case.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks for enlightening us on that.
No
What does
problem.
the what does the organization do for places that have limited freshwater access?
Yeah, no, that's good. And you'll be surprised. Sometimes countries which you wouldn't necessarily think have a problem with water do. I mean, we do a lot of work, for example, in what we call in our jargon the small island developing states. But these are Pacific Island countries, for example, which they're obviously surrounded by water. They're surrounded by oceans, but they don't necessarily have easy access to fresh water. So we invest in projects which help create fresh water, make fresh water available for the people living on many of those Pacific islands, because you need to find ways to cut pollution out of water, to limit the actual waste that goes in water, to make it clean, to make it healthy for people to drink and to wash with on a regular basis.
Okay. Well, what about the fish? I learned that in 2050, there will be more plastic in the ocean than fish. What is the GEF doing to slow or stop that from happening?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and it's an issue which is, I've been at the Jeff now for about 4 years, and when I first joined, nobody was really talking about this problem. So it's an issue that has come to the attention of international organizations a lot in the last few years, and I think that's because people, and like yourself, and I'm sure people who also listen to this podcast, you see plastic, you see plastic on the beaches, and you hear about stories of plastic getting into the sort of food chain, and horrible images of whales and others that have consumed vast amounts of plastics which are washing up in our oceans today. What we're working on is not so much. We're trying to work on projects which address the origins, the source of the pollution. So we're working quite closely with countries and industries on the production, of chemicals and waste. The way plastics are produced. Can we make plastics? Can we produce plastics in a more environmentally friendly manner, and find ways to actually remove plastics from the rivers and from the wastewater that comes from the big cities before it actually gets into the ocean. So that's where we're investing our resources, not so much in taking the plastics out of the ocean, which is obviously important, and I think people are trying to find ways to do that, but to actually try and prevent the plastic from going into the ocean in the first place.
So, instead of working on something to take out the plastic that's already in there, you're going to make sure no more can get in.
Absolutely. That's our goal. I mean, there's always going to be something that goes in, but if you think about what happens, things get dumped often hundreds of miles away from the actual oceans, but it works its way down through rivers and other ways into the ocean. So we're trying to address the problem more at its source, if you like. That's one way to look at it.
Okay, I get that. Finally, I'm here hoping to talk about deforestation. Every minute, an area the size of a football field is destroyed in the Amazon rainforest until there's nothing left. I find this very concerning. What are the impacts of deforestation overall?
No, Ryan, I really share your concern on this one as well. My work in this whole area, and you probably don't know this, I'm not, but uh, it really started when I was at university many years ago, but in England. I got very interested in the whole issue of the rainforest and the threats to the rainforest. So I ended up actually traveling through Africa and making a film about a project in Cameroon, which is a country in Central West Africa, about how to conserve the rainforest. And this was 30 years ago. And at that time, people were asking the same questions that you are now, because the rainforest was being cut down at such an alarming rate. So unfortunately, there has been some improvements, but the rate of deforestation hasn't slowed. And this is a huge concern, because when you remove the rainforest, you lose something called biodiversity, which is essentially the animals and the plants and the ecosystems within the rainforest. There's been recent reports that deforestation has contributed to about a million, almost a million species now threatened with extinction through deforestation and other environmental degradation. It also has big impacts when you take down the forest on the climate. The rainforest in particular, but other forests too, play an important role in the regulation of the climate, and also in the water cycle. So it has impact on the water, and of course, also impacts on local people as well. So there's big implications of cutting down forests. So it's something that's really important to address.
I know. I'm with you on that, and I hope more people understand that soon, especially the people who actually go out and cut down trees.
Absolutely.
What is the GEF doing to put an end to deforestation? Can it stop?
That's a very good question. I mean, I don't know whether it can ever, if I'm totally honest with you and your listeners, I don't know if it can ever stop completely. I mean, people will always want to cut forests for wood, and there's also people, particularly who live in certain countries, who need to make a living from agriculture, etc. Small farms and things. So there will always be a certain amount of deforestation. But the important thing is to slow it down, and to find alternatives for cutting down the forest. I mean, what the GEF does, we focus on two areas. One is we work on projects to protect existing forests. So we have some very big projects and programs in places like the Amazon, which I'm sure you've heard of, in Brazil, to actually conserve existing forests, and to help local people maintain the forest, keep it intact, keep the richness of the forest together. But increasingly, we're working on another area, which is to address what we call the drivers, the environmental drivers of deforestation. These are the things that bring more deforestation, like the global food system is one example. There's a huge and growing demand for food, and often forest is cut down in places like Brazil to actually produce, to produce food, to actually go to produce crops. And so it's very important to actually address the food system as a driver of deforestation. So we're doing a lot more work on this area, and trying to provide alternatives to people, so that they don't actually need to go and cut the forest like that. And if I can say one more important thing, and it's very topical at the moment, and we're starting to do some work on this, there's growing evidence that the current coronavirus, the origins of this particular virus, is partly linked to growing deforestation, and bringing wild animals in closer proximity to humans. So I think there's a very important recognition, and we've just started some work on this in the last few weeks, to look at what can we learn from deforestation, doing less deforestation, and the health issues of things like this awful coronavirus, which is obviously plaguing the whole world at the moment. So it's your last issue you mentioned, but it's probably, along with climate change, one of the most important to talk about. That's for sure.
I understand. So you were saying that you're mainly not working on just cutting down the trees, but you're working on how deforestation drivers are completely wiping out areas to make food for different countries.
Absolutely, that's correct.
Okay. Is the GEF trying to connect with the youth on these issues? For any interested listeners, where can they learn more?
Yeah, I mean, our main audience isn't, I've got to be honest, isn't the youth. We mainly work with governments. That's our we give, as I said at the beginning, we give grants, we give resources to countries. But we recognize the youth is so important in this work. So often we're engaging with the youth in conferences, or at particular events where we invite youth to speak, so that the governments that we are working with also hear the voice of youth and their concerns. And because we can learn from the youth. Often they have lots of very good good ideas about how to deal with these problems. And we partner with a lot of organizations which have big youth programs. There's one called Connect for Climate, for example, which does a lot of work with youth all over the world looking at climate change issues and doing a lot of campaigns and work on social media and things like
Just to
that.
clarify, when you say youth, do you mean my age or 18?
It's probably, I mean, there is some work that for people who are, it tends to be people a little bit older, um, the older high schoolers and college students. But what we've just done, which is actually very, very interesting, and in fact, I don't know if it's possible that I can share a web link with you, which you can include in the podcast. But we're supporting something now very exciting, which is a partnership with my old organization, the United Nations Environment Programme. They've teamed up with the National Geographic, which you may have heard of, and others, and a number of other partners like the TEDx, who do these big speaker conferences, and a few other UN agencies to create something called the Earth School. And the Earth School is providing lots of interesting materials and information to enable kids of your age and older, but also some even younger, to actually have access to resources and learn more about nature and what they can do, and how to how to get involved in dealing with environmental problems. So I think this new Earth School initiative is very exciting and something that you and your listeners would be interested in.
About that, where could my listeners go to learn more?
Well, this one you can definitely get from earthschool.org, but in terms of the GEF, our website is very simple. It's the G as in good, and E as in England, F as in Fred.org. That's the website for the organization that I'm the director of communications. So you can get a lot more information on that website about all the things and more that I've been talking about that we do. But as I say, I think the Earth School will be a very interesting thing for your readers as well, your listeners.
Okay. Well, I have learned so much from you today, Uncle Robbie. Thanks so much for your time. I look forward to when we'll be able to see you in person again. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks so much. And you. Take care.
So everyone, we went over climate change, international waters, and deforestation. Through each one, we learned about how they dealt with countries who don't cooperate, how they're using projects to work on everything and bottling stuff at the source instead of just going head on into everything. And we learned that they work with the youth. Everyone can I'm sorry about that. Everyone can work together to officially make this world brighter, even the youth. Well, that wraps it up for this episode of A Change of the Chance. I hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.